everyone and welcome back to my channel, BethChatsBooks. Now I've just realised that it has been a long time since I've caught up with you guys about what I've recently been reading, and turns out I've been reading quite a few books. So I'm going to try and make this as brief as possible because I don't want to bore you guys to death, but I wanted to recap where I am at with my reading. So since we last spoke, I told you of a few books that I was reading which I have finished. So one of those was A House for Mr. Biswas by V.S. Nepal. And I had a weird relationship with this book. I really wanted to enjoy it, and some bits were just so interesting and immersive and I got really involved in the story, and then other parts were a little bit slow. So this novel really follows Mr. Biswas's life from childhood all the way to his death at the end of the novel, and it follows him and the Tulsi family and him with his wife Sharma, and the trials and tribulations of his career, of his relationship to the Tulsi family, which he doesn't really get on very well with them at all, and his character can be quite irritating, and he's not very flexible, and he doesn't believe in the same importance of family and community that the family he's married into does. And so this is a little bit slow in parts. It's quite a lengthy novel. I read it on ebook and it was quite lengthy. I borrowed it from the library. And so I did find myself trying to get through this novel a little bit more. So I decided to give it 3 out of 5 stars. I think the writing was very, very strong. The image and the picture of the family and the characters was really clear. The characters were really well developed. They jumped off the page. You could imagine who they were, and the dialect was very authentic. Obviously because the author is writing about something that he knows. Reading this back to back with Love After Love by Ingrid Persad, which is another book I'm going to mention, and both about the Indian culture in Trinidad. So both novels are set in Trinidad and both deal with Indian families, Indian immigrants in Trinidad. So I found that bit really interesting, and both back to back as kind of comparative novels really informed me on a country and on cultures within that country that I knew nothing about. But overall the reading was a little bit slow, so I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. And the next one I want to talk about, I'm sorry if I just flick this way, I kind of use my reading journal as a great guide to know where I'm going with books, because at the moment I'm racing through quite a lot and I forget what I've talked to you guys about and what I haven't. So the next one was Girl with a Pearl Earring by Tracy Chevalier, which I have left in the safe company of my stepmom, who's going to read it when she goes on holiday in the next week or so, because I think she'd really enjoy it. She likes historical fiction. So this is set in the Netherlands, the 1400s or the 1500s, I can't remember off the top of my head, and it follows the servant girl, and she ends up working for Johannes Vermeer, who's a famous painter at the time, and ends up becoming a subject for one of his paintings. This causes a lot of tension in the house. It becomes a secret to his wife, and then it comes out to his wife, who is not very happy about it. It's not really a spoiler because it doesn't really tell you much else about the plot, but it's a very slow-paced plot. It focuses on the intensity of relationships within this house and how Griet experiences intensity between her master, Johannes, herself, and the wife of the household, and then the mother of the household, because Johannes's wife's mother lives with them and she's quite a character as well. And then it's the goings on of the house. There's a lot of children, and there's more children being produced throughout the novel, so there ends up being quite a lot of kids in that household. And then it's about her own home life, what happens there, and how she feels isolated from a sense of home when she has to move in with this family, and about an external relationship she has outside of the household with somebody else. So it's very slow plotted, not a lot dramatic happens, but it follows her on this journey and how her experience of working in this household affects her for the rest of her life, and how it's a pivotal moment in her wider story. Really, really loved this book. I think it was a lot better than A Single Thread because it had this intensity, this passion in this novel. It was a lot shorter than the other, but it was plotted. The terrain of where this novel was going to go was just a little bit better than A Single Thread because we weren't bogged down in a lot of historical terminology or expectation. what things were going to be like. I think with the historical fiction set in this time, it's that far removed that you can create a great image of what the house would be like without having to go into specifics of her job role. Whereas I think the other novel set in between the world wars, we know that period of history very well, so I feel like she had to spend a lot of time convincing you of exactly how she would embroider and exactly how the church bells would be rung, because a lot of people will have experience to a certain extent of how that is done. It's not that far out of our realm of imagination to imagine a bell ringing session or some ladies in the church embroidering, whereas I think this household and the goings on is removed enough for us that we don't need that much filling in, we don't need that much proof that you know about this period of time very well. So overall, I gave this 5 out of 5 stars because I raced through this book and it was everything that I wanted a single thread to be. Now, I think Tracy Chevalier is a phenomenal writer, and I still gave a single thread 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed that, but I think this was just a higher level, and it would be really interesting for me to go back to her other works of fiction and see how they compare, because obviously this was a earlier novel of hers compared to A Single Thread, which is one of her most recent, and I really enjoyed that. So maybe I can find her earlier works and connect with them and find a similar vibe. Then I listened to This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay on audiobook from the library, and I was blown away with this. I've been wanting to listen to it for a very long time, and I just kept putting it off, and I thought maybe because it has been so well received and it's everywhere. It went through a craze a few years ago of being in every charity shop, every bookshop, every shelf. I thought maybe it will just be too hyped and maybe I'll just only like it. And obviously I work in the NHS. I work as a receptionist at a GP practice, so it's not the same as working in a hospital, but I do have some experience of what it is like working for the NHS and the things that patients say and the things that patients do and the expectation placed on people within the NHS. And some of these things I really resonated with, because often in my job role I'm sometimes incredulous about the ways that people speak to each other when it comes to the NHS, and the expectation and the lack of understanding of how the process works and the impossible positions that they put our GPs and our clinicians in every single day. And a lot of what he says, some of the funny moments in here where he talks about what patients have actually asked him, really made me laugh, because I could get that. Obviously working on the phones and having 100 to 200 phone calls a day, I understand some of these patients and what they would say very, very well. So I found those bits really funny. What's great about this audiobook is he narrates it himself, so the jokes land really well. You can tell that he is a born comedian, and it's no surprise that he's gone into script writing, screenplay writing, and into comedy, because he has a natural flair for it. And even though some of this book was really upsetting, his quick-witted charm makes this such a funny book. I was laughing out loud at some parts, and some of the bizarre things that have happened in his experience as a junior doctor that seem completely implausible to people who haven't worked in the NHS provide very funny and very anecdotal bits for this book. So I found it very, very, very funny. Overall, it's very funny, but the last section of it is very heartbreaking. It humbles you very quickly, and one thing that I feel incredibly passionate about, and that's why I'm trying to pursue this career in counselling, is I think we're really, really letting people down, particularly people that work in the NHS. From my experience in a GP practice, GPs are considered a little bit less important than doctors and nurses on the front line, especially with things like COVID going on at the moment. But everybody's roles are being stretched and their capacities are being stretched. And from my experience working in a GP practice, GPs are now expected to be miracle workers, counsellors, therapists, your best friend, accessible at any point of the day for your needs. And the system has not caught up with the expectation that people have. And so therefore these GPs, these doctors, these nurses are trying to perform miracles every single day, trying to stretch their clinics, trying to stretch their time, and there is a breaking point. And so what Adam Kay addresses in this is he had his breaking point, and I really think in the future there will have to be a revamp of how we consider the staff that are working for the NHS and the priorities for their mental health as well as their physical health. And as somebody who wants to pursue counselling, I really strongly hope that in the future there will be more accessibility for people within the NHS to get access to counselling and talking therapies and help when they need it. For example, what I found so harrowing and that stuck with me since the end of this book is how Adam Kay says nobody at any point ever said the word counselling or therapy to me or ever spoke to me about whether I would need that. So there's an expectation that doctors and nurses can just cope with these things, when in reality, especially with COVID and in the light of the tragedies of COVID and the pressures that the doctors and nurses on the front line have been under, there's an expectation they're a machine and they can just keep going. And we're going to have a huge mental health crisis at the end of this, I think, because we've left them on their own for too long and we've expected too much. And I think it's really sad. But that's my little soapbox rant over. But overall, a very, very good book. So I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. It was just a really great audiobook experience. The next one that I read was The Trauma Cleaner by Sarah Krasnostein. I can't pronounce it, but hopefully she won't be too offended because she talks about Sandra Pankhurst. The star of this book cannot pronounce her last name either, so I'm sure she'll let me off. So this is a non-fiction biography where it goes through the life of Sandra Pankhurst. So Sandra Pankhurst is a transgender woman, so we know throughout the book that she does transition to become biologically female. I listened to this on audiobook from the library again. It wasn't narrated by the author, but that didn't really matter because the author had an authentic Australian accent, so I really felt like that really enhanced the reading experience, so you know where it's set. And the bits of dialogue that come directly from what Sandra would say had that emphasis because it had that Australian accent. You could visualise her better and more authentically. I know that sounds strange, but so yeah, it goes through Sandra Pankhurst's life. It goes back to when she was a child and she was abused by her adoptive parents. And then it goes through her life where she tries to marry and have kids and then realises that something is wrong, and then she leaves the family behind. She works as a prostitute for a while, she transitions biologically into a woman, and she has a tragedy. She has a girlfriend that gets murdered in a club. Then she ends up working for a funeral parlour, marries somebody that's biologically male, has an affair with somebody that's biologically male, and then she ends up in trauma cleaning. So we kind of weave back to her autobiography from her words, from what Sarah has over the years worked on to try and get her authentic story. She does mention often in the book that she can't really ever grab hold of fact with Sandra, that she's very elusive about certain things, she forgets things, the chronology of her story is very warped. But she tries her best to compile it, because Sandra is diagnosed with lung cancer, and this is almost like a love letter to Sandra's life. And then we learn about trauma cleaning through case studies of the houses that Sandra goes to clean. So some of them are horrendous, that she goes and cleans houses where there's been a murder or where there are people who are drug addicts, but then there's also houses where people are just hoarders, or they're lonely, or they've been left to just rot in their own shit, literally. And it's so fascinating hearing about trauma cleaning through Sandra's own words, because Sandra doesn't see trauma cleaning as a negative career choice and a negative thing. She gives each person that she cleans their house dignity. Now that's incredible for me, because a lot of people find trauma cleaning as a horror story, the worst job in the world. But she sees these people as sad and lonely, and one of the case studies really stayed with me. I think she was called Dorothy, but she was a really educated woman who'd been a head teacher, who had degrees, who was of very high intelligence, but she was a hoarder and she'd let herself go and she just didn't know how to cope with this house. And so every time you see these stories of people having to clean up horrific incidents, for every murder that she's had to clean or every damaged house, there's a story like Dorothy where she's been left by the wayside and society have disregarded her as unimportant. And that was really powerful in this book. So really enjoyed this as an audiobook as well. And I also gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I just thought it was really good. Just a fascinating topic, something I knew nothing about. And Sandra is an incredible person. You almost feel like she's a character someone's constructed because she's so strong. But she's flawed and she's accepting of those flaws. She's just a very phenomenal woman, to be honest. And it was a pleasure to read the audiobook and really get to know her. And I thank Sarah immensely for creating this audiobook that's a love letter to Sandra and for the whole world to meet Sandra. It's a very good book. And then the next one I want to talk about, but only briefly, is Paris Trout by Pete Dexter. I can't talk much about this because in the next 2 days on Voxer we're all going to discuss this book, because this is BarterHordes Bookclub read for August and we're discussing it on Voxer. So I'll link any information down below so that you can join if you would like to. Obviously it doesn't give you that much time now to read this book, but if you just want to get a taste for what we're going to discuss and then join for September, then that's fine. This was really interesting. So this is written in the 1980s, but it was about the 1950s in the south of America and follows Paris Trout, who kind of owns one of the local stores in this town. A bit like what we call in the UK an off-licence or a corner shop that kind of has food and knickknacks and alcohol and whatever else. So he runs the store, but he also does this second business within the store where he gives loans to in this book it describes people as coloured, but the black people within the community. And then he gets his interest. So Paris Trout is a white man, and at the beginning of the novel he's accused of killing 2 black women within their own home. And this starts a catastrophic cataclysm of consequences for the town. So he goes to court, and a lot of the people within this village know him too well. It's such a backwater small town, everyone knows everyone. If he gets done for this, then what does it say about the town? Then there's also a lot about consent and rights. He has this very skewed view of the world that no matter what, if he's owed something, he'll get it. And the whole reason they died is because they're the son of the household. It was the mother, and she adopted this girl, made her work for the house for them and took her in, which apparently in this novel they reiterate it's quite normal for the black community to take other waifs and strays of their community in and look after them, because the girl didn't have any family. Or she did have family, but her family they sold her off to somebody, and the mother of the household intervened and saved her from becoming somebody's plaything. She took her in, and her son owes Paris Trout a debt for a car that got smashed up. He doesn't want to pay off the car loan because he says it's damaged. And so Paris Trout comes with somebody else to the house to threaten, to try and get the money back, and it ends up with these 2 women being killed by Paris Trout's gun. This is a really interesting look at gun law in America and the rights of black people, and historically the lack of rights of black people. And Paris Trout is a very unlikable character. You really enjoy not liking him, especially in a modern context, the way he sees the world. And the way he treats his wife is absolutely abhorrent in this novel. It's revolting. It's despicable. Some people, trigger warning, that might be just very distressing. Paris Trout is a character that really is the personification of white privilege, and it's a very interesting book even after all these years later, the things that it raises, especially in our modern context. So I would encourage people to read this, considering, obviously it was written in the 80s and some people are not interested in reading books from the past, and they want to read the most current books. This has a lot of really interesting themes and discussion points, so I'm really excited to see what people will say about it on the Voxer chat. So there's that. So I read Love After Love by Ingrid Persard. On reflection, I'm going to give this 4 out of 5 stars. This was so much better than I expected. I thought this was going to be a contemporary love story, but it follows 3 characters. So it follows Mr. Cheaton, Miss Betty, and Solo, her son. So Mr. Cheaton and Miss Betty end up living together because she needs someone to look after the house at the beginning of the novel to help her pay for the rent for her and her son. And we know at the beginning of the novel that her husband died. He was drunk and he fell from the stairs. And Mr. Cheaton ends up creating this really great relationship with Betty and Solo, so he kind of adopts Solo almost as a son. But Mr. Cheaton is gay, and there is a very comical scene quite early on in the novel where Miss Betty thinks that her and Mr. Cheaton should get together and have the perfect family for Solo. And obviously she comes to find out that he is gay through some difficult circumstances for her situation, how he breaks the news to her. But anyway, they move past that and they end up having a great friendship. And then Solo finds out something that he doesn't like, and this leads him to move to America. And so it's left with just Mr. Cheaton and Miss Betty. Mr. Cheaton moves out to pursue his love life. He wants to find a man. And Miss Betty said, yeah, there's no point in us living together if you're going to do that, because we'll just encroach on each other's space. So both Miss Betty and Mr. Cheaton have some love stories going on, some more tragic or failed than others. And we learn about the friction between Miss Betty and Solo when Solo moves to America, and a lot of things happen. But this was kind of better, in my opinion, than A House for Mr. Biz was, because it does go through the trajectory of these 3 characters' lives, but in a more eventful way. Things are going on at a better pace, and it was a similar length of novel, but we had lots to sink our teeth into. So there are some trigger warnings in this novel. For Solo does a lot of self-harm, which is quite distressing to read. There is a lot about people's attitudes in Trinidad to homosexuality, so there's a lot of homophobic content in this novel, and the struggle that Mr. Cheaton goes through about having his private life and his private identity as gay and his public identity as a teacher at a high school as the secrets that he has to keep. So it's very heartwarming that Miss Betty and her group of friends accept Mr. Cheaton as he is, but some events happen where we learn that the wider community of Trinidad don't feel the same way about gay men in Trinidad. So there's a lot of really, really interesting themes. So I'll give it overall a 4. I really enjoyed reading it, so I thought maybe it would be a 4.5. But I think as I carry on reading books, I will probably forget about this one over time. But I do think it was so refreshing to have so many interesting and modern themes addressed in this novel. Very good. So the next one I read was In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I cannot talk about this because it's for the BookTube Finals non-fiction round. So one of these books that I'll read will end up being the non-fiction winner. So I can't talk about that until it's all been announced, and then I can put my vlog up. So I've read that one. And then I'm currently reading The Stonewall Reader by the New York Public Library on my library app on audiobook. So I've still got quite a chunk. I've got 8+ hours, 8.5 hours on that audiobook, so that will probably take a while. I'm still trying to slowly read Sherlock Holmes's next instalment. If I'm being honest, I'm not getting through that very quickly because there's about 7 or 8, maybe more short stories, and each of them are an hour on the audiobook with Stephen Fry, so I'm really not getting through that very, very quickly at all. Then I'm also reading The Holiday by T.M. Logan, that's downstairs. I was lent that by a friend, so I'm currently reading that. And I'm reading Know My Name by Chanel Miller on Kindle. I have to read that because that's also like In the Dream House. It's in my non-fiction finals category, as is Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow, which I will also be reading once I finish the other 2. And Just Like No Visible Bruises by Rachel Louise Schneider. So they're currently the books that I'll be trying to get through. And I also have The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Neyer. I might have just said the author wrong completely, but that's coming from Book Depository, and that is September's pick for BarterHordes Bookclub that we're doing on Voxer. So if you want to get that early and start in September with us, then that's the book, and I'll link it down below so that you can also order it from Book Depository or get hold of a copy or whatever in time, because we usually start reading it the 1st of every month. So that is everything. I'm sorry that this was a really long-winded video, but I wanted to get that out there so you know I am still here, still doing videos for you guys. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with a brand new video. Bye now.